And for more, we're joined by Dr Anas Iqtait, lecturer in economics and political economy of the Middle East at Australian National University. Firstly, today is the last day of the 4-day truce, but Hamas says it is seeking an extension with Israel and to increase the number of hostages released. That must be welcome news on all sides.
Certainly is. It will be contingent, however, on the release of further Israeli captives from the Gaza Strip. Also, the terms of the continuation of the ceasefire also will have to be clear. From Hamas's side, what we have been seeing in media circles in Arabic is that Hamas is also interested in releasing further Palestinian prisoners and Palestinian children from Israeli prisons. So it is welcome news. However, for now, what we know for sure is that the ceasefire is going to end after the 4th day, unless a new deal is brokered or new terms are being are to be published by the mediators, particularly the Qataris and the Egyptians.
Israel believes Hamas wants and needs a pause in fighting so it can regroup and reconstitute its forces. What is Hamas likely doing with this time that they've had?
The level of damage that we are seeing across the Gaza Strip is extensive. Now, what Hamas is doing with during this ceasefire is perhaps regrouping and reorganizing. But also, it's important to mention that the Gaza Strip's governance system is run by Hamas, and this includes things such as healthcare, education, obviously, which has been suspended since the beginning of the war, other municipal services, and the like. So, from Hamas, for the armed wing of Hamas, rather, it is possible that they are regrouping. However, from a governance point of view and a humanitarian point of view, it has been a very needed truce for the Palestinians to catch their breath from the extensive bombardment, which has seen the vast majority of unit structures or housing structures completely or partially destroyed in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, and the vast majority of the Gaza Strip's population displaced by the ongoing bombardment.
And can you just tell us more about the Palestinians that have been released? Close to 80 so far, made up of women and children under the age of 18. Why were they imprisoned in the first place? And how many more are there imprisoned in Israel?
The total number of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prison is yet to be confirmed because since the 7th of October, a large number of people have been imprisoned across the West Bank, perhaps 2,000. However, this number is yet to be confirmed, as I mentioned. The vast majority of Palestinian prisoners are trialed through Israeli military courts, including Palestinian children. And they are held under different pretexts, from stone throwing to demonstrating illegally to protesting to objecting to arrest, and the list goes on. So the context is extremely important here, that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip obviously are under Israeli military occupation, and the Palestinians there, the rules that live under are the Israeli military rules, including their imprisonment. A very important information here to share is that Israeli military courts have a conviction rate of more than 97%. So it is these people are being held without really clear accusations. And when there are accusations, these people are being prevented from properly defending themselves, and they do not go through a fair court system. And obviously, we are not to expect a fair court system within the presence of an Israeli military occupation across the occupied Palestinian territories.
Hamas has told Qatar that it did not capture civilians, saying other militant groups took advantage of that attack on October the 7th. Qatari officials believe 40 other women and children are being held in Gaza by gangs and civilians. Can you put that into context for us? How does that complicate this rescue mission?
Obviously, it makes it that much more complicated. The capture of Israeli civilians at the beginning of this war was tragic. And it appears to be that a lot of these civilians have been captured by militant groups that do not belong to Hamas. So one of the objectives of the ceasefire was for Hamas to be able to identify and count and locate the total number of Israelis who have been held captive or who are being held captive inside of the Gaza Strip. So obviously it adds to the complexity of war and the fact that Hamas doesn't really have a complete picture of how many Israelis are inside of the Gaza Strip makes it that more complicated for the continuation of this ceasefire and also for a peaceful resolution for the release of these captives from inside of the Gaza Strip.
Israeli-Palestinian hostility has been going on for decades, but this recent violence has drawn a lot of new eyes to the conflict. What's the main thing our viewers should keep in mind as they watch these developments unfold?
The biggest tragedy of the ongoing conflict across the Middle East, and particularly obviously in Palestine and Israel, is that it is one of the most documented conflicts in history. It is not a conflict that is unsolvable. To the contrary, the biggest thing that I would like to leave the viewers with is the fact that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are internationally recognized as occupied territories. And the responsibility of the occupier in these territories is completely borne obviously by the occupier, which is Israel, including the responsibility to protect Israeli and Palestinian civilians inside of the occupied territories. So the biggest thing to leave the viewers is that it is occupied territories. And the tragedy that I mentioned earlier is the fact that this conflict has a large number of United Nations Security Council resolutions, and therefore there is a blueprint for solving the conflict going forward between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And what we are seeing today is a crisis of the implementation of these resolutions, and by default also a crisis of the implementation of international law. Once that is implemented, I believe that the conflict can be resolved.
We're running out of time, but I want your quick thoughts on Mr. Netanyahu. Pressure on him is likely only to build until all captives are released. What impact is this current deal going to have on the Prime Minister's war effort?
With regards to Netanyahu, I believe that his political career is over. And much of what he is doing in the Gaza Strip is to prolong his political career as much as possible. The release of the complete Israeli captives that are inside of the Gaza Strip is going to be very complicated, particularly the release of those captives that were soldiers serving around the Gaza Strip, which, as we have been hearing from the mediators, will have a completely different way of discussing and mediating and negotiating their release from the Gaza Strip, which may include the release of the total number of Palestinian prisoners, the 7,000 or so that I mentioned earlier. So Benjamin Netanyahu is obviously prolonging his political career, and most likely, as soon as this war is over, or perhaps even before it is over, he will be removed from office.
Yeah, there have been calls for that sounding loudly. Thank you very much. Dr. Anas Iqtait, lecturer in economics and political economy of the Middle East at Australian National University.